Most fans of the Wheel of Time call her a bully, a relic of an arrogant age who looked at the savior of the world and saw nothing more than a disobedient child. To many readers, Cadsuane Melaidhrin is the ultimate symbol of Aes Sedai hubris. She is the woman who slapped the Dragon Reborn, the woman who treated a living god like a petulant toddler. When we first encounter her in the late books, she feels like an intruder, a grandmotherly figure with hair ornaments who thinks she can control a man who can level cities with a thought. And yet here is the uncomfortable truth that we must face today. Without Cadsuane's ruthless and calculated arrogance, Rand al'Thor would have become a monster far more dangerous than the Dark One himself. She did not come to advise the dragon. She did not come to guard him. She came to dismantle him. She weaponized social degradation, tactical humiliation, and centuries of psychological mastery to break the stone that Rand al'Thor had become. You see, by the time Cadsuane arrives, Rand is already dying, not just from the wounds in his side or the taint on Sabine, but from a spiritual necrosis. He was hardening his heart to save the world, and in doing so, he was losing the very reason the world was worth saving. Today on As You Wish, we are decoding the legendary Aes Sedai weapon who saved humanity by breaking its hero. We are going to look past the surface-level bullying and examine the cold tactical brilliance of the woman who was brave enough to be hated so that the world could live. This is the architecture of arrogance. This is the story of the woman who bullied a god. Chapter 1. The Architect of Arrogance and the Failure of the Tower. To understand why Cadsuane is necessary, we first have to understand the catastrophic state of the world she stepped into. By the middle of the series, the White Tower is no longer the stabilizing force it once was. It is a house of children playing with matches. Under Elaida, the tower had become a den of paranoia and incompetence. They treated Rand like a wild animal to be caged. They sent sisters to kidnap him, to beat him in a box, and to humiliate him through physical pain. But physical pain didn't work. It only made Rand harder. It turned his heart into a fortress of ice and steel. Enter Cadsuane Melaidhrin. She is not just another Aes Sedai. She is a living legend. Even among the long-lived sisters, Cadsuane is an anomaly. She is nearly 300 years old. To put that in perspective, when the current Merlin seat was still a novice, Cadsuane was already the most feared Green Sister in history. She had faced the Forsaken while others were still learning to channel. She had kidnapped kings and deposed queens. She had walked away from the tower because she found its politics boring and its sisters small-minded. When Cadsuane finally decides to find Rand al'Thor, she isn't doing it for the tower. She is doing it because she sees the pattern fraying. She understands a fundamental truth that the rest of the world has forgotten. The Dragon Reborn is a man, and a man who cannot feel is a man who cannot lead. Rand at this point believed that to save the world, he had to become iron. He believed that if he could just stop feeling, if he could just make himself hard enough, then the world couldn't hurt him anymore. He was cutting off his own humanity to survive the pressure of the prophecies. This is what we call the hardening. But as any blacksmith or engineer will tell you, iron is brittle. Iron does not bend under pressure. It shatters. If Rand went into the last battle as a pillar of ice, he would have cracked the moment the Dark One touched his mind. Cadsuane saw this catastrophe in the making. She knew that a dragon who cannot cry is a dragon who cannot care. And a dragon who does not care will destroy the world just to end his own suffering. Her mission was the most difficult task ever attempted in the history of the Aes Sedai. She had to teach the most powerful man in the world how to be human again. And her method? It wasn't kindness. It wasn't motherly love. It was friction. Chapter 2. The Tactical Humiliation of a Messiah. Now let's look at the mechanics of her bullying. This is where many fans get frustrated with her. Why is she so rude? Why does she refuse to use his titles? Why does she call him boy in front of kings and Isle chiefs? To answer this, we have to look at Rand's environment. Rand is surrounded by people who fall into two categories: those who worship him and those who fear him. Both of these reactions are toxic. If everyone around you treats you like a god, eventually you start to believe you are one. You lose your connection to the common man. You lose your perspective. This is what I call divine distance. Rand was floating away from reality, protected by a shell of titles and prophecies. Cadsuane destroys this shell with a psychological sledgehammer. When she first meets him, she doesn't curtsy. She doesn't call him the Lord Dragon. She treats him with the weary patience of a grandmother dealing with a toddler having a tantrum. Think about the specific genius of this. Rand expects opposition. He expects people to try to kill him or bind him. He knows how to fight enemies, but he doesn't know how to fight someone who simply refuses to be impressed by him by calling him boy and criticizing his manners in public. Cadsuane was conducting a form of social surgery. She was stripping away the divine labels to force Rand to confront the human underneath. Every time she frustrated him, every time she made him lose his temper, she was poking holes in his mask of stone. She was forcing him to react emotionally. In Cadsuane's worldview, even rage is better than emptiness. As long as Rand was angry at her, he was still feeling something. He was still connected to the world of men. She weaponized discomfort. She made his throne feel like a bed of nails because she knew that if he ever became comfortable in his absolute power, he would be lost forever. She was the only person in the world who could look into the eyes of the Dragon Reborn, eyes that had seen the face of the Dark One, and tell him he needed to wash his face and mind his tongue. That isn't just bullying. That is a high-level psychological intervention. She was the anchor that kept him from drifting into the madness of his own ego. Chapter 3, The Perilous Net and the Illusion of Safety. But Cadsuane didn't just rely on psychological warfare. She brought the ultimate physical deterrent, the Perilous Net. This is one of the most fascinating pieces of lore in the series. The Perilous Net is a collection of ancient Ungral and Terangral from the Age of Legends, disguised as simple hair ornaments. It is perhaps the most concentrated collection of power on a single person in the entire world. It can detect the use of the one power and even the true power. It can disrupt weaves. It can create a shield that makes the wearer nearly invulnerable to physical or magical attack. But let's look at its narrative function. Why did Robert Jordan give her this specific tool? Up until this point, Rand's raw strength in the one power was his ultimate security blanket. He knew that no matter how many Aes Sedai surrounded him, he could simply blast his way out if he had to. He was the apex predator of the one power. Cadsuane changed that. The moment she sat in a room with him, Rand's instincts and the voice of Lews Therin in his head screamed at him that this woman was dangerous. For the first time since he learned to channel, Rand felt vulnerable in the presence of an Aes Sedai. He couldn't just will her away. He couldn't just overpower her weaves. This vulnerability was a gift, even if Rand hated it. Cadsuane used the Perilous Net to create a space where Rand's power meant nothing. In that space, he had to rely on his mind and his character rather than his ability to weave fire and spirit. There is a profound philosophical shift here. Most people in the world wanted to protect the dragon so he could fight the last battle. Cadsuane wanted to break the dragon so he could survive the last battle. She knew that the Dark One doesn't win by killing the dragon. The Dark One wins by turning the dragon, or by watching the dragon destroy the world in his own madness. By using the Perilous Net to neutralize Rand's physical advantage, she forced him into a mental chess match. She was conducting spiritual surgery. It was bloody, it was painful, and it left deep scars. But it was the only way to cut out the growing cancer of his stoicism. She was teaching him that power is not a shield against your own humanity. Chapter 4, The Far-Madding Gambit and the Cage of No Power. To see Cadsuane's strategy in its purest form, we must look at the incident in Far-Madding. This city is a geographical anomaly, a place where an ancient ter'angreal called the Guardian prevents anyone from channeling. For most Aes Sedai, Far-Madding is a place of terror. To be cut off from the source is like losing one of your five senses. But for Cadsuane, Far-Madding was a laboratory. It was the perfect environment to show Rand al'Thor exactly who he was, without his godhood. When Rand enters Far-Madding to hunt the rogue Ashamin, he is stripped of his primary weapon. He is just a man with a sword. And yet even here, he tries to maintain his mask of stone. He tries to command the world through sheer force of will. Cadsuane watches him struggle with a predator's patience. She knows that Rand is terrified of being weak. His entire identity has become synonymous with being the Dragon Reborn. But in Far-Madding, he is just Rand al'Thor, the shepherd. Cadsuane uses this environment to humiliate him, not for the sake of cruelty, but to show him that his strength was actually a crutch. When Rand is eventually captured by the city's authorities and thrown into a cell, Cadsuane doesn't rush in to rescue him. She lets him sit. She lets him feel the cold iron of the bars. She lets him experience the helplessness of a common man. Why? Because she wanted him to realize that his arrogance had blinded him to the world around him. When she finally does rescue him, she does it on her terms. She forces him to accept her help as an equal, or rather as a student accepting help from a master. This was a pivotal moment in their psychological war. She proved that even in a world without the one power, she was still the one in control. She proved that her power didn't come from the source, it came from her character. She was challenging Rand to find that same internal strength. She was telling him, if you are nothing without the power, then you are nothing at all. Chapter 5, The Web of Influence and the Cadsuane Method. We also have to look at how Cadsuane managed the people around Rand. She didn't just bully the dragon, she co-opted his entire support system. Think about the way she treated Min Farshaw. Min is arguably the only person Rand truly trusts, the only person who sees the man and not the myth. Cadsuane recognized this immediately. Instead of pushing Min away, she brought her into the fold. She respected Min's visions, but she also used Min as a barometer for Rand's sanity. This is a classic Cadsuane tactic. She builds a web of influence that Rand cannot simply slash through with a sword. She did the same with the Ashaman and the other Aes Sedai. She didn't care about their ranks or their loyalties. She cared about their utility in saving Rand's soul. She created an environment where Rand felt like a child, surrounded by adults who were all in on the same secret. This is arguably where her bullying feels the most oppressive. She was suffocating his ego by surrounding him with people who were loyal to her vision of his survival rather than his vision of his own martyrdom. Many fans argue that this was her greatest mistake, that she isolated him even further by making him feel like he couldn't trust his own advisors. And they have a point. Cadsuane's arrogance was so absolute that she never considered the possibility that Rand needed a friend more than he needed a warden. She was so focused on breaking the stone that she didn't realize she was also cracking the foundation of his trust. Chapter 6, The Semirhage Incident. The plan collapses. This brings us to the turning point, the moment where Cadsuane's tactical humiliation met a force it couldn't control, the arrival of the Forsaken Semirhage. Cadsuane had spent weeks trying to provoke Rand into feeling. She had pushed him and prodded him and insulted him. She thought she had the situation under control because she had the perilous net and she had the experience. She thought she was playing a game of chess with a boy. She didn't realize she was playing a game of life and death with the shadow. When Semirhage attacked, she used the male Adam the Domination Band. For the first time in his life, Rand wasn't just threatened, he was enslaved. He was forced to use his own hands to attempt to kill Min, the woman he loved. This is the moment where Cadsuane's arrogance backfired spectacularly. She had stripped away Rand's defenses. She had made him vulnerable. She had forced him to feel again. And the result? Because of the domination band, those feelings were turned into a weapon of absolute trauma. Rand didn't break into tears. He didn't regain his humanity. Instead, he retreated into a darkness so deep, it has its own name, Darth Rand. The tragedy of this moment is that Cadsuane's failure was rooted in her own greatest strengths. She believed she was the only one who knew what was best for the world. She had failed to protect the one thing she promised to guard, Rand's heart. When Rand finally broke the Adam by reaching out to the true power, he didn't just destroy the collar, he destroyed the last vestige of his connection to Cadsuane's lessons. He looked at her not with rage, but with a cold, dead indifference that was far more terrifying. He realized that for all her legends and all her hair ornaments, she had failed him when it mattered most. The birth of Darth Rand, Cadsuane Melaidhrin, wanted to teach the dragon to laugh and cry. Instead, she watched as he became a ghost of shadows and cold steel. She wanted to save the man, but she ended up creating a monster. By the end of this chapter, Rand al'Thor is no longer listening to anyone. He has banished Cadsuane under the threat of death. He has embraced the true power. He is a man who has decided that if the world wants a monster to fight the Dark One, then he will give them the greatest monster the world has ever seen. Did Cadsuane push him too hard? Was her tactical humiliation the catalyst for his descent into madness? Or was this tragedy a necessary fire, a crucible that Rand had to walk through to reach the other side? The plan has failed. The legend has been humbled, and the savior of the world is now its greatest threat. But as the wheel weaves, the story is far from over. In part 2, we will explore the fallout of this failure. We will follow Rand to the top of Dragon Mount, and we will witness the ultimate redemption of Cadsuane Melaidhrin. We will answer the final question: how does a failed plan save the world? The dragon has fallen into darkness, and the woman who tried to save him is left standing in the ruins of her own arrogance. Join us for the conclusion of this epic analysis in the next episode. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because you do not want to miss the rise of the Zen Dragon. Until next time, remember, the wheel weaves as the wheel weaves, and even the most arrogant heart can be a tool of the light.